Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We're so glad to have you for the second in our video series this summer about the employee hierarchy of needs. And today's presentation is about the very bottom of that pyramid that we talked about last week, which is safety. So we're going to think a lot about the different types of safety, how we can protect that safety for our employees, and the impact that it has on how employees are able to get things done, and also your talent strategy and infrastructure and initiatives, the order in which you should apply them, making sure that employees have safety built in to the way that they work so that they can focus on what actually needs to be done. So we'll be here for about half an hour. And I think we mentioned this before, but LinkedIn Live has quite a bit of a delay between when I'm actually presenting here and speaking in real life and when you hear it on LinkedIn. So please do submit any questions into the LinkedIn Live chat. And Amethyst from coLeague will send those to me because I will not get them while I'm using this platform that we use to present on LinkedIn Live. So she'll send those to me. There'll be a bit of a delay, but I will get to them if you do ask a question. And I'm happy to elaborate on anything, to answer any questions as we go. So I'm going to add my presentation here. And like I said, so today we're going to focus on the employee hierarchy of needs and safety. But first, let me introduce coLeague. So if this is your first time attending one of our webinars or your first time hearing about coLeague, we bring people experts to mission-driven organizations for the very important goal of freeing up leaders to focus on mission-critical priorities. We do that in three main ways. First and foremost, we embed fractional people leaders in organizations. And fractional people leaders are leaders who function in that actual role, whether it's a chief people officer, an HR business partner, any role like that, but on a part-time and or interim basis. So that might be 60 hours a month, 100 hours a month for 3 months, 6 months, or a year. And we bring in veteran, very experienced chief people officers and other people leaders to support organizations when they don't have the time or capacity to support a full-time leader in that role. The second way that we support organizations to free up leaders to focus on mission critical priorities is through specialized consulting and support. There's a lot of different ways that takes shape. Sometimes it is deploying coaches into your organization to support leaders. Sometimes we might bring an expert to do an analysis of your compensation model and help you build a new model that reflects the values that you want to use in your organization. Or we might have somebody come and build a performance management system. Often those projects are working in conjunction with an embedded fractional leader, but we do those as one-off projects with organizations as well. And then lastly, our brand new HR subscription service, coLeague On Call. coLeague On Call is a way for organizations who are very small to get access to the expertise of the members of coLeague without committing to even a fractional person. And so you can come to us with different resources that you want to have evaluated or edited. You can come with your toughest HR questions. And we think of On Call as much better than Googling it or working with an AI agent, but much more reasonable and affordable than calling a lawyer. So we're there to support all of your various HR and talent needs, but just for a few hours a month. So today, again, we're focusing on the employee hierarchy of needs, which is a model we introduced last week. If you haven't seen it yet, you can go to our website and view the video that we did not last week, but last time, that introduces this model. We will be talking about various aspects of it, but if it's your first time, I do recommend that you, after this, go and watch the first video and make sure you have a good understanding of the model itself and why we use it. And that'll make this one make a little bit more sense. But the goal of the employee hierarchy of needs, it's a model that helps you center your people in your talent strategy and infrastructure. And the reason we created this is that a lot of times when leaders are thinking about their talent strategy and infrastructure, they're thinking about process, and they're thinking about what do we need to do to make sure everything is in place. When we have come through all of our years working in talent, along with all of our co-leaguers, have learned that there are certain things that should be in place first in order for those other more sophisticated talent initiatives to land. And so, like I said, go back and watch a more detailed version from our previous video. But today we're going to be focusing on the very bottom of that model, which is safety. And so when people come to us and they say, like, we have a whole list of initiatives that we want to move forward, we want to have performance management, we want to have a new competency model, we want to look at our compensation philosophy, we want to review everybody's job description, we have a whole list. Where do we start? The employee hierarchy of needs ensures your team's most basic needs are met first, so that your other things that you're putting in place don't fall flat, or worse, backfire by contributing to burnout, turnover, and a toxic work environment. So that employee hierarchy of needs, this is the last time we're going to go over any of the other layers of the employee hierarchy of needs, but it starts with safety, which we'll talk about for the rest of our time today. And then employees need a strong sense of purpose so that they can know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how their work connects to the bigger picture. It's very important. And if those two things are in place, safety and purpose, then you have a strong foundation where employees feel secure, and then you can start implementing all of your structures. So these are your transparent talent systems and structures putting in place that support your employee needs and goals. And then we can think about autonomy. So employees are effectively and independently able to pursue their goals. And they also know what type of future is possible for them, and they know how to pursue it. And then lastly, we think about incentive. And incentive is very future focused. Employees know what's next for them, how they can get the support and resources that they need to get there. So today we're going to only be focusing on safety. And so a lot of folks talk about psychological safety as though it's sort of a luxury. And in our case, when we're talking about safety, we're talking about physical safety, psychological safety, and also the confidence that their employment is legal and secure. When we talk about legal and secure, we mean they're not going to get a surprise tax bill that because their taxes weren't taken out properly. Secure and legal meaning you followed all of the compliance for that employee's state and then the federal and all of those things. So they can feel confident they're not going to get surprised, and then they are psychologically and physically safe. But like I said, it's often treated as a luxury, as something extra. We think about it as a sort of, top of the pyramid, if you will, type of thing where, okay, once we have all our structures and all our processes in place, then we can think about how, people are interacting with each other and how they feel. But what I want you to think about as a leader is to always be thinking about safety first. Do my employees feel safe and secure enough to relax and just focus on their work? Are we doing anything that or missing anything? Are we doing anything? Or are we missing anything that can jeopardize that safety? I'm going to adjust this here. Okay. So are we doing or missing anything that jeopardizes that safety? And we're primarily going to talk today about psychological safety. Physical safety is obviously very important, and most states and workplaces that have safety regulations, it's pretty straightforward on how to follow those. If we had more time, I could dig into the ways that psychological and physical safety interact, and that I might even purport that all safety is psychological safety, because physical safety sends signals that you can be psychologically safe, but we do not have time for my dissertation on that concept. Instead, we're going to talk about mostly psychological safety today. And the almost universal definition of psychological safety is the belief that one can speak up in a group or a team or an organization or in a relationship without risk of punishment, retaliation, or humiliation. So that is the sort of agreed upon definition. There is an expert from Harvard who sort of launched the whole concept of psychological safety as it applies to pop psychology and business. And everyone agrees that this is what psychological safety is. However, it's always defined as interpersonal. So that means that a team or a relationship may have psychological safety or not based on the current makeup of that team or relationship. And so, as I'm going to talk a little bit about today, that I believe is actually quite a risky move. I think that if you foster an environment where interpersonal interactions are healthy and safe, it's very important, but it's not enough. I think that it's too dependent on whether any particular individual in your organization has both the skill and the will to foster psychological safety in every interaction. I think a lot about managers who are, for instance, like protecting the psychological safety of their team, but often that means that they're absorbing other people's anxiety and no one is looking after them and their psychological safety. So by that traditional definition of psychological safety being interpersonal, it's missing a really big thing, especially when we think about the employee hierarchy of needs. So what are the things that might get in the way of employees feeling safe, and what are the structure, systems, processes, et cetera, that we can put in place first to ensure that employees feel psychologically safe? And the interpersonal part is a big part of that culturally, but most importantly, as leaders, what you can think about is regardless of who works here, we can implement structures that anyone can rely on to make sure that they feel safe in whatever way the organization is capable of handling. So when you rely on the goodwill of individuals, you're not taking into account all of the context that can impact psychological safety. And so if you don't get those other things right, it can undo all of your manager supportiveness and all of the inclusion work that you've done if folks don't feel psychologically safe by the structures and things that exist within the organization. So they might feel good in a conversation with someone because they're being supported and they feel like they can speak up, but deep down they're experiencing all sorts of anxiety because maybe they didn't get paid on time, right? Or maybe they don't have an up-to-date job description. Those are the types of things we're talking about when we talk about structures that can reinforce safety at work. So from everything we're talking about from this point forward, we're moving beyond the interpersonal, which is of course important, and thinking about what can organizations do, what can leaders do to bolster psychological safety for their teams, for their employees, outside of what we believe to be the basics of, human interaction, respect, all the things that you want, a safe place where people can raise their concerns, ask questions, et cetera, without retaliation or humiliation. So 10 minutes or so, we're going to talk about a really useful model that I love and I talk about all the time that can help us think about the types of things that can undermine psychological safety at work. This is also true outside of work, but in this case, we're talking about explicitly at work. I'm going to introduce a model that some of you may have heard of. There is a neuropsychologist named Dr. David Rock, and he leads the Neuro Leadership Institute, which is actually based here in New York City. And he wrote a book called Your Brain at Work that I found incredibly useful for understanding why things always felt so messy at work, like why everybody had these big feelings all the time. Everyone was always upset. And it seemed that it didn't matter what an organization did. People were still just like always kind of feeling anxious. And this was a huge balm for me in understanding how I could help mitigate those circumstances for team members, for leaders, for an organization, and honestly, most importantly, for myself. And so SCARF is an acronym, but of course, it's nice when we think about our neck being a vulnerable place on our body and when we can protect ourselves by wrapping ourselves in a scarf. So there are 5 social situations, according to David Rock and his research, that can cause humans to feel not just psychologically safe, but physiologically unsafe. Like there are social situations that are the equivalent of if you're in the dark and you hear footsteps behind you. And there are things that we just honestly haven't evolved yet enough to be able to naturally just ignore. There are plenty of ways that an individual can bolster their own ability to tolerate some of these things. But in terms of what an organization or leaders can do, these are the social situations that we want to be cognizant of because of their ability to undermine employees' psychological safety at work, which we know can really get in the way of being able to get anything else done. So that first social situation is status. So when we think about status in this case, we're thinking about status in terms of a hierarchy. So humans have all sorts of hierarchies in our world, within our families, within our organizations, within our schools, within our societies. And status says, I know where I stand. Like, I know where I fit in the pecking order. Even if we have a flat organization, that stuff still exists. And what we mean here is like, not only where I fit in the hierarchy, but also like why my work matters. I know that I'm doing something that is real, like that is contributing to the group, and I am respected in the space where I am. And so threats to status might be getting like really out of the blue negative feedback. It was, not timed or expected. It was the first time you're hearing this type of thing. That's the kind of thing that will make you feel like I thought I knew where I stood, and then suddenly I don't. Another example of that is I'm always the last to know, like things that might affect me or my department or my team. Like I'm always the last to know. That makes you feel like you have a position on paper, but your reality doesn't match that position in the org chart. And that will certainly destabilize someone who thought they understood where they stood. And then some new information causes them to not understand anymore. And because we are here at coLeague always talking about the talent systems and structures that we put in place in order to support our employees, the ones that can really impact status are things like org charts. I don't know if any of you have ever had the experience of seeing or having an employee see an org chart that wasn't yet published or was out of date and had sent people into a spiral because they're like, maybe it's one of 3 or 4 options for a future org chart, but they see that and they're like, my department's going to get eliminated, or I thought I was going to report to this person. Now I'm going to be reporting to a different person. That's the type of tool that can heavily impact status. And if it's done well and done right and kept up to date, it can positively impact it. Things like reviews, feedback. I have the things in bold in these next section for systems, infrastructures, et cetera, that are sort of at that bottom of the pyramid stuff you've got to make sure you get right first. So org chart, if you have an org chart, it must be up to date, it needs to be accurate, and it needs to be easy to understand and not have any surprises. I'm looking at the time, we're going to have to really speed through these next ones. So the next one in the SCARF model is certainty. So that says, I know how this is going to go. And in a work context, that's like, okay, like I know what the general plan is for the company. I know where I fit in this plan, the strategy. Our processes and expected outcomes are clear. It's all like, there's no like weird misaligned expectations. Threats to uncertainty include poor change management. So unannounced changes, things are always shifting. There's an unclear strategy. It's fuzzy. You don't really know what's going on. That will make people look into the abyss of the future and just panic. And that can really, really get in the way of folks being able to focus on their everyday work. And there's lots of things that can contribute or impact certainty, either positively or negatively. So that's, of course, your strategy and your goals, how well you manage change in the organization. A huge one is the employee handbook. So that lays out and makes clear what things are true and not true in terms of policies in the organization. A talent or HR calendar. I know when reviews are going to be. I'm not going to be surprised by them. And of course, HR compliance is a huge one. So making sure that everything is legal and up to date and up to code. And the next one in the model is autonomy. So we do talk about autonomy in the employee hierarchy of needs in a slightly different way. When we're here, we're just talking about individual autonomy in a more traditional sense. And so that is, I have a say in what happens to me at work. And so that's like, I have a reasonably predictable and manageable schedule and workload, meaning I'm not getting things piled on at the last minute. I can sort of expect what my week is going to look like, unless that's built into the job where there's a decent amount of uncertainty and sort of getting things thrown on your plate. And of course, being able to get things done without undue barriers or interference. And so that means undue barriers are like, I can't find anything, nothing is organized, I'm looking for this document, I can't have to ask like 10 people to figure out where it is. And interference is what everybody calls micromanagement. So you've got somebody who's like breathing down your neck, telling you how to do every little thing, and you don't have the opportunity to get things done in the way that you think is appropriate and best in order for you to meet your goals. And so also just a lack of clear systems is really a threat to autonomy because it creates those undue barriers. So things that can impact autonomy are things like standard operating procedures, very important to partner with your operations team to make sure that all those processes and things are clear. Manager expectations and competencies is really how you can fight some of that micromanagement and the disparate experiences that folks have with their manager. Really good communication tools that are transparent, like Slack, where people can see information live as it's being shared, as long as it's appropriate to be shared. And a very important one is a really good up-to-date job description. So somebody can feel empowered to get things done when they know that they're working on what they're supposed to be working on. The next one, the R, is relatedness. So if status is about where you fit in the hierarchy, relatedness is about in-group, out-group. And it's also about like sort of the human touch and human relationships. And so if the other one is I know where I stand, relatedness is I know where I fit. And so that's social inclusion. We know what that is. That's often what we're talking about when we say inclusion. I like to also talk about professional inclusion, which means things like when I'm working on my project plan, I am making sure that all the people who need to be informed about this or need to be involved in this are involved. I'm including the right people in my work. That makes people feel like they are related to things in a way that makes sense to them. And also the other side of this being the human touch, human aspects, that you are making real touch points with folks, not just in an email back and forth or in a document back and forth kind of way. So those threats can be, we all know about in-group, out-group dynamics at organizations, especially when you have like an old guard and a new guard, like that type of thing that can really threaten people's experience of relatedness. Or if everything is just data and metrics and documents, and there's no way to like check in with a real person about how they're feeling or how they're doing. You just feel like you're a robot. That's a way to really mess with relatedness. And the types of things we can expect that could impact relatedness here are those communication protocols. So like, when do we communicate about what can we expect? There's really fun social tools you can add into your organization. One that I've used at multiple organizations is called Donut, where it pairs people up randomly if you opt in, and then you can schedule a virtual coffee if you're remote, or you can have a real coffee if you're in person, and just spend half an hour getting to know each other in a non-work context. Or if it is a work context, it can be like, what are you excited about? What are you working on? Especially if you don't work closely with that person. And the most important thing that can affect this is transparency. So people understand where they fit, because everything is clear and above board, and there's no weird cabal that they don't know about that's, secretly managing everything. Like, everything is super transparent, and therefore you can understand where you fit in the larger picture. And the last one is very, very important for human beings. These are all obviously important for humans, but fairness is a uniquely human borderline obsession. Like, humans really like fairness. There's a study that showed that people would rather have $5 out of $10 than 8 out of 20. Even though $8 is more than $5, they feel like they're getting their fair share when it's 5 out of 10 versus 8 out of 20. And so fairness at work is like, I expect to be treated equally. And this isn't even in the DEI spectrum. It's certainly related, but in this sense, it's much more fundamental. So like, standards are applied consistently. Rules are clear and sensical. The things that can threaten fairness are like caprice, especially when paired with favoritism. Like, oh, this person wanted it, so they got the budget for it. But when I went through a process to try to apply for a budget, no one would even respond to me. That's an example of things feeling really unfair. Or if some people are getting lots of praise and recognition and rewards and other people aren't, and you can't figure out like why some people get and other people don't. Or undue punishment, or being singled out. Like, those types of things can make you feel like things aren't fair. And people will really react strongly if they think things aren't fair. That is a thing that, as a career people person, I think we all know that nothing will get somebody feeling more upset than if they feel like things aren't fair. And so the types of systems and structures that can impact fairness, the biggest one I would say is your compensation model. Even if you're very small, having some sort of philosophy and model that people can feel in their bones that they're being compensated fairly for their work will go a long way. Of course, having a structured feedback and review process, especially when there's something extra structured, like a platform like Lattice, can help people see that like everyone is participating in this. You know, the feedback itself can be private, but the fact that we're all using this system makes things feel fair, it's consistent, everybody's using the same protocols, etc. So you're not at the whim of a manager who might not be super good at keeping up with things like feedback. And of course, a big one related to fairness is about how we do hiring. So making sure we have interview protocols and other talent acquisition protocols that reflect fairness so that people aren't, it doesn't appear as though you're just hiring your friends, that you actually go through a process no matter who you're hiring. So just for a quick recap, that is the SCARF model is status, I know where I stand. Certainty, I know how this is going to go. Autonomy, I have a say in what happens to me. Relatedness, I know where I fit. And fairness, I expect to be treated equally. So these are the ways we can think about psychological safety beyond the interpersonal. We can think about the talent systems, structures, infrastructure, et cetera, that can bolster that psychological safety for employees and create something that people can rely on, even if they're having a bad day. Asking someone, an individual, especially considering what's going on in our everyday lives, no matter where you live in the United States, things are pretty stressful. And so if you rely on individuals to maintain psychological safety for the rest of your organization, it's very risky, and it puts a lot of pressure on the folks who have to be even more in charge of that than others, which is typically those sort of frontline managers who are managing individuals who are doing individual contributor work. So again, today we were thinking about safety as the bottom of the employee hierarchy of needs. Next time we'll talk about purpose. And those two combined, I believe, form the strongest foundation. And if all of those things are in place, you can get a lot of leeway from employees when you're still figuring out what order you want to implement your talent initiatives. If you're like, we want to do a new performance management system, but first we're going to make sure everybody has a really strong, accurate, up-to-date job description, because that is going to help people feel more clear and sure about what their job is. And then we can move to the next step of thinking about reviewing someone based on that job description. Because if we jump straight to the reviews, there's going to be confusion, maybe even resentment, frustration. If somebody's like, I'm doing all these things and they're not in my job description, like it can lead to all sorts of issues. So next time we'll talk about purpose. Today we talked about safety, and the big idea is that safety unlocks capacity. I think these are the magic words here. So when employees know that they're safe physically, psychologically, and legally, they're not using their energy to sort of brace for impact. They're not always anticipating that something is going to be wrong or bad. Instead, they can focus that energy on their work, on their growth, and their contributions. And this is such a really key thing in order for your employees to be able to just basically get things done, is that safety unlocks that capacity. So if you as a leader are interested in how you measure up against the employee hierarchy of needs, we have a really, really cool tool called the Talent Diagnostic. And it's both, it's very people-centric. So it's thinking about how your employees are experiencing your talent infrastructure and your talent strategy, and identifying gaps based on the employee hierarchy of needs, so that when it's time to implement your new systems, processes, et cetera, you can ensure that the basics are there first. So I've put a QR code up on the screen. If you are watching on one device and have access to another, then you can do that. Otherwise, please just reach out to me directly, either on LinkedIn or on sarah@coLeaguePartners.com, and we can get something set up to talk about doing the talent diagnostic at your organization. And then, like we've said, we're doing 4 more of these. So the first week we did the overview. This week we talked about safety. And then we're going to do, I should have put it on the slide, but we'll talk about purpose on the 15th. On the 29th, we'll talk about structure. I can't remember what is that one. And then we'll talk about autonomy and incentive. So thank you so much for joining today. You can always reach out if you have questions, if you want a presentation like this for your organization, for your talent team, for anyone, please reach out directly and we can arrange that. I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday week and a wonderful rest of your summer, and we'll see you very soon.